because the AFR rejected all that expense. And I had to literally go back and then recode, put all the different things in. And it just made me like want to pull my hair out. That's why I keep it short. But I will go back. I will send you the cheat sheet. I will send you the cheat sheets. I will actually make these documents available electronically as well. So you could Google, like you could, like if you do control. Oh, and one more thing. I'm sorry. That slicer report that we had where you guys can like isolate function codes that we had last year, I'm going to have Mrs. Matosh make this in a slicer thing because she's better at that than I am. So Mrs. Matosh we just found out right now as we're talking, that's her Valentine's gift, that she's gonna make this a slicer thing for us. And then so that way you guys can use that as well and build that out. So just give us a couple days on that, but we'll have that all up and running, and we should have this just going for you. And also, I will, beyond April, my last day, I will be available for any questions that Dr. Fox or you guys have on the budget, if there are any issues or anything like that moving forward. So as long as Mr. Lehman doesn't ask. I'm just kidding.
Do you want me to go next? Or you
could go
want
ahead.
someone softer next?
No, you could go next.
All right, so I kind of don't like the changes you've made.
Oh, okay.
Because, like, on the first page, it says that we're paying the high school teachers $500,000 more. And you have to dig through about 5 other pages to try to figure that out. And there's all these, the superintendent doesn't get paid next year, and neither does the secretary.
No, he's there.
Oh, he didn't get paid last year. And then there's this number that they got paid in a lump sum last year of $600,000. So was that the whole office staff?
Yeah, that's the whole office staff.
The problem I have with this is it's very hard to follow.
I think that's where we're going to have to just go through and ask our questions and have.
Well, then we're going to have a
answer our
meeting every
questions.
day in March. Because I'm not saying that it is, but it's a lot of lines on here. And sometimes you have to go 300,000 numbers to find the answer at the end.
Yeah, I saw quite a few. I mean, before we even started,
I'm
I saw
kind
the
of
high school
concerned that
teacher
this is
thing.
going to
and
be
I-
a long, drawn-out budget process because the numbers don't equal.
The one thing the other side of that, Phil, the thing I like about this is I'm hoping, like last year and the year before, we had a lot of questions and they weren't able to answer because they had aggregated so many things into one line. And so I think if the next business manager uses this same format, then we will finally have a line-by-line budget that we'll actually be able to get answers to. But I think we just have to go through yet again another difficult year like
So
this.
like some of the, so like for an example, like what he's saying is, so all the office staff, like so like you're saying they weren't paid in that. So what I could provide you with is a salary and benefit report that was directly out of our accounting software that will have the account numbers on them for all of our staff that is paid out of this. The only one that won't have would be the paraeducators.
So
You know
anywhere
what I mean? Because
anywhere
paraeducators aren't in the system, but all the teachers and all the staff is, you know what I mean?
I think would be helpful is anywhere there's a grossed up number from last year, if we knew where it is this year, just like by what line. So we could say, okay, these 10 things are now really, or this one thing is now these 10 things.
Yeah, and like the only issue that I have with that is the previous person didn't leave many notes as to what he put in those particular lines. So when I was putting those in, I just, I got what they were coming from, but I took a report out of the system, and I took the report out of the CSIU system, and I broke it out exactly how it will be going into the CSIU accounting system so that all the numbers exactly match what I gave you in that aggregate will exactly match what goes into the accounting system, like what exactly goes into the accounting system. So there is no like quote unquote grossed up numbers, so that you guys ask me like a million questions. I'd rather answer a million questions than have like you guys say, well, everything is great and good, but then when my replacement comes in, they come in and say, well, how did Pete arrive at this particular number? Like I had the questions. You know what I mean? Like, how did I arrive at these particular numbers?
You don't know what made up those grossed up numbers from last
Well, I mean, I know what made up like the big bucket items, like the salaries and the benefits, because I know what they made up, but if, I don't know what made up some of the other grossed up numbers that he got, like the supply, like, you know what I mean?
But I think for the salary ones, that's what I'm, like, those are the really big ones that jump out at me. 600,000
So
here,
I know what
600,000
made them
there.
up, I know what made them up because, but I also think I also think that is where there was a cushion built in as well a little bit, and some open positions were built in, because some of those numbers were a little bit, like some of the benefits and stuff were were higher than, like, maybe, I think he put in 10% for health insurance and not like I put 6.5%, because that's more of the accurate number. I didn't put I put a very actual number. So like when you look at, for an example, some of the health insurance numbers, so I'll give you an example. When you guys go through the benefits, the health insurance piece, you're gonna see there'll be a decline in health insurance pieces, but I mentioned in the budget there was an increase of 6.5%. You're going to say, well, these numbers don't match up. The reason they don't match up is because there was a significant increase last year, but there isn't as big of an increase this year as there was this year, because they marked it up. He might have grossed it up 12%. I'm only grossing it up 6.5%. So the number actually declined because I'm putting a more realistic budget in. And that was one of the remarks that the auditors made, was that the expenses weren't a realistic budget. I put a more realistic budget together so that we have, oops, damn it. So I put a more realistic budget together in there. I don't know, Christine gives me a junk thing.
So I think two things will really be helpful. I think the first thing that will really be helpful is, I think the abilities that Mrs. Matash has to build programs like you saw last time, where you could go into a cost center and put in, like, I'll just use business office as one, and then you could drill down and see all the expenses that are associated with these line item codes. For me, that's what I like to see. I like to kind of be able to click on that and drill down.
Right.
And those splicers built in, it's a really nice program that she built and designed. That's going to take a little bit of time for us to transition that. But I think that's really going to be extremely helpful to be able to drill down, and you can then click on, athletics and see that. You can click on high school and then see the expenses associated with those as well. Another thing when it comes to, like, salaries, we don't just take a look at, here's a salary, and then apply a formula of 2.75%. That would be wrong to do so. Each individual, where they're at in terms of the collective bargaining agreement, versus also an analysis of what credits that individual may be taking based upon the credit requests that they have, formulated by where they're going to be moving on the collective bargaining scale, and then multiplied by that annual increase as well. So those are all kind of individualized, and a lot of work went into those individualized numbers.
And for and the salaries, I can assure you are correct, because I had my payroll person go through them and build the contract based on the negotiated agreement, and she looked at every teacher and ensured that he or she was on the right step and had the right credits. So, I mean, so when I looked at those numbers and I double-checked and triple-checked them, because I was, some of them were, more off than I thought. So either, I hope that they were, I can't testify to what happened before I got here. So, they're based on how we're spending the budget this year. I can say that we are progressing where I would expect we were progressing. So I think the budget is accurate from 22, 23. But I know the budget I'm producing is accurate too, and is going to be more accurate. Is going to be a very stable and accurate budget to be run through as well. But I also want to say, like, even the athletic budget. So you're going to see in the athletic budget, for an example, I took out, so there was broken out for junior high school coaches and high school coaches. Well, I budgeted for, if you go to one of the last pages in the 3200s, I budgeted for programs instead of just junior high and high school coaches. So you're going to see a lot of negatives and pluses. So basically program coaches. So you're going to see negative, you're going to see pluses as well. But they don't equal really a net. They're going to equal a small net positive because the coaches all got raises, but they're not going to see, but they got small nominal raises based on their contract. They didn't get, they're not going to see, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're not going to see, they're going to see negatives and positives in the variance. You're going to see negatives, but they're going to see and positives for the varsity coaches. But it's not like we added 2 varsity coaches to every sport. It's because you had the programs got 2 coaches extra. So it's basically a program added.
With this, with either the program that you have with this, or with the new program that we're now assigning Christine to do, or maybe it's a future goal.
No, it's
for
not really a program. The
Yeah.
slices are just like a,
But just, I don't know what the access is.
yeah.
Would there be a way, if we wanted to have additional workshops, like if we wanted to have additional workshops to discuss the budget instead
Sure.
of just meetings, would there be a way to do it, like if we said, okay, tonight we're going to discuss the middle school budget?
No, I think.
Would there be a way to break it up different ways? And we could pick, like, maybe we don't want to do the middle school budget, maybe we want to do all schools, but we want to focus on like cafeterias and buildings and athletics. You know, or a way to break it up so we're not just looking at this entire budget for
Sure,
6 separate
absolutely.
meetings. But if we had a program where we had the capability of separating it, and we could decide as a board, okay, we want to have a workshop because we want to look at the budget for the high school.
Mm-hmm.
You know, something like that instead of, you know, I don't know. I'm just thinking, but I wanted to check with you first to see if we even had that capability. And then if we have, as a board, want to decide, hey, we would like to have a couple of workshop meetings instead of just a budget, and we want to break it out by school or break it out by, you know, education and facility, you know, just break it out some way instead of just looking at a whole thing.
Absolutely, that's
You
possible.
might also get the public more interested as well, if they kind of understood what we were talking about, instead of us just going over line items. If they're like, hey, I want these improvements in the middle school, I want to see if it's going to be on the budget, they would know, I want to come to this budget workshop or attend it online because they're going to be talking about the middle school that night. I don't
Sure,
know,
we
it's
could,
just a
I,
thought.
that's possible.
I'm absolutely positive.
Just a quick question, maybe, and maybe you mentioned this in your presentation, I missed it. 564, 65, and 66, which are highlighted, are placeholder, professional services placeholder with ESSERS. Can you
Yes.
explain that again?
That is money that is budgeted for, that will be used for grant purchase, for grant services. Basically, that is money that is, we're using grant. So we'll see the offsetting expended revenue that comes in. That's like a one-time funding source. So that money will go, that expenditure will go away when the revenue goes away.
But what is it being used for?
Krista has the breakout for the grant spend, the grant stuff. So it's spent for like, there's psychologist spending and social work and stuff like that. So that's what we're using
And
it for.
the only reason I'm wondering that is when that revenue goes away, will this be a budgeted item we will have the year after that?
That will be up
Or
to
is
the
this a-
board, that'll be up to the board to decide, but for the most part, I think we can absorb it into the general fund from a lot of the stuff. It's just helping us to kind of take that off of the general fund books and take that revenue, like add the revenue in. And that's why, that's one of the things I have to look at to make sure that I did not double book. So for an example, I have to make sure that those expenditures are not counted in the general fund somewhere else. So like for an example, I'm not paying a psychologist, say, Mr. Lehman is the psychologist, and I'm just saying, Mr. Lehman's a psychologist, and I'm paying him twice in the general fund. Like, there's a line item from the general fund, and that placeholder line item is accounting him twice. So maybe that's why I highlighted them for myself and for you guys to realize that those items may come off the books during a future meeting as we continue to move on this process. Because this is February 7th. This is not a final product.
Right, yeah, and then I guess my next thing, and maybe I'm wrong, Christine, when you were looking at the iPad refresh a month ago, was there not the thought of using Esther's money to pay the part of the first payment of the lease? And if that was the case, can we use that money to pay the last lease payment for this year?
That's correct.
Okay, so, and the reason I was asking that was, I didn't look at the revenue sources. I was just looking at it as an expenditure, and I was just wondering.
Every intention is still to stay true to our contract, which is what we made in ESSERS, and to use that funds for that intended purpose, which is lease payment.
And that would not be this highlighted area.
No, and there is still, but what is in there is I want to say inflated, but a bigger than that revenue source that would cover that revenue expenditure, because the original budget that Christine, just that Christine gave me had like the double payment in there. So like, for an example, remember the first thing that she showed that was presented in January? That's still in here, so that $200,000 will come off now after we discussed it tonight. That will come off in the next, so the updated
So
stuff.
this
will come
by
off.
no way, shape, and form is finalized. This, the reason they're three-hole punched is we're going to continue to work on this and refine this. This is where we are at in February. We need to come back in March and refine some more. We're going to build that dynamic spreadsheet where you have the ability to go in and see. That's going to be real time and dynamic to be able to move as things are updated. We'll begin that question and answer. And let's in March have a discussion at caucus to schedule, to schedule a finance or budget workshop to begin to have those conversations and then see where we're at and where we need to go.
Okay, and then I have two last things. The one you're not going to like, the other one's funny. The first one is I would like to see the total cost of all the salaries that of employees that we've added in the last 3 years, including their health benefits and all that stuff that we didn't have previously to COVID.
Is
And
that the will of the collective board? Is that the information that everybody wants?
The counselors we added, the changes we made to the administrative office, the ESSER's teachers that are on here that their funding runs out in this budget.
Some of that's, well, in the district office, some of that's apples and oranges.
Well, I hope that it is, but
What do you?
because I think that it's going to be a bigger number than everybody remembers, because when we voted on them, it was $60,000 here and $80,000 there. And when you add that up to 10, you're at $700,000 or $800,000. I think it's a lot bigger of our deficit than what everyone is remembering.
I do not want those numbers.
So what I'm hearing is, kind of goes back to Mr. Bard's original question, to have a full printout of everybody's gross earnings.
No, I'm looking just for the new stuff.
It's just for.
I'm sorry, I just need some clarification. When you say new stuff, what
We
do you
went,
mean?
so let's just say, and I'm just throwing these numbers out there because I don't remember. We went from 5 counselors to 7 counselors. And we went from 5 people in the district office to 8 people in the district office. And we hired teachers that are on here for ESSERs that we didn't have before to run programs.
Okay, first, let me go back to that point about ESSERs. We never added any personnel with the ESSERs grant.
So you just move them around?
We didn't add any personnel with the ESSERS grant. What we did was take ESSERS funds to offset general operating budget costs. No personnel was added. Contracted services were added through social working to offset the cost of that, and also another grant that we received and procured. But no staff was added due to ESSERS.
And that was where I wanted that clarification when I was asking about the highlighted thing, because it looks like on that placeholder that it was for staff, and I didn't think we ever wanted
It
that.
says on there it's for staff.
Yeah, and I think maybe that'll get cleared up.
So what that is, and that was a carryover from a previous thing. So what that does, so that is because it's added to a funding source level position. So if you look at the funding source thing, is because when you book the expenses to a funding source, you need to account for them in a certain way. So I need to go back and make sure. So for an example, we need to move, if you're going to have staff that are going to be, so like what John said is you're offsetting general fund operating expenses with the COVID revenue. What you're doing is you're granting yourself a window to offset some expenditures. I have to go back and make sure that in that budget that I've presented, and in the budget that perhaps past people have presented, that those teachers or counselors or whatever are not double budgeted. So like you don't have Counselor A being booked on the general fund in 2120 or 2130, but also being counted for, budgeted for in the ESSER funding sources. So that means I might be able to lower the deficit even further because we could take out the one on the general fund until the ESSER money then is no longer accounted for, and then they have to go back onto the general fund. So I think what Phil's point is that, and Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, is once the COVID money is gone, then the general fund expenses are back on the regular books again, and then the deficit might go back up to where it was, or where.
So
But
if,
Greg-
if we didn't add any teachers, then I don't need that information. But we did change the total makeup of the office, and we hired a bunch of people. When I say a bunch, it could be 3,
One.
but it could be 5.
I think
It wasn't 1.
But the district office, we hired someone from HR, which I think was critical. And we reallocated some things. So maybe what you need instead of numbers is positions that have been added or names or whatever. But I think we added one additional person and reallocated some, I think. But maybe you need clarification, and the counselor was, I think, the other.
Yeah, but we only technically hired 1 counselor, but we really hired 3 because we were short 2. And that is still an increase of where we have been operating for the last 5 years. So it's not just, I'm saying the difference between where we were in 2020 and where we are now, not the difference in because we didn't hire 2 previously to that, because we'd been running without them for 5 years. So in normal business, that means they weren't needed.
Were we short? I don't remember.
Counselors, we went from like 4 or 5 to 7 or 8, whatever it was, I don't remember.
But we were looking at counselors before COVID. That wasn't a COVID
Yeah, and it got
issue.
pulled off a budget because we didn't have the money for it, and then when COVID
But
happened.
because we didn't know.
It got shoved through.
It got pulled off the budget because a lot of large expenses got pulled off the 19 budget because we weren't sure what was going to happen with the shutdown of COVID. So we put a lot of things on hold. But if
No, we
you-
didn't know about COVID in 2019.
I know.
So we pulled all that
We've
stuff
had-
off prior to COVID happening because the budget didn't balance then.
So I think historically looking,
And
I
I
think,
said this in 2020,
But I'm not-
2021, and 2022, that we can't just add this stuff to the budget because someday we're going to have to pay for it.
And we're not adding anything to the budget that we're not already paying for. If the only reason
aren't
that you
paying
want to
for it because we
know,
don't have enough
if
money.
the only, Phil, I have let you talk this whole time. If the only reason that you're calling for counselors is because you want to get rid of counselors, then I do not want to waste the administration's time figuring out how much they make in their feasors, because I am going to vote no to getting rid of counselors. Because let me tell you, even with the additional counselors, it's not enough at our schools right now. We do not have enough counselors at our school. So I don't know what the point is of pulling this number, because if we want to go back to where we don't have enough counselors, and I mean, let's get rid of everything then. We don't want to have enough counselors, we don't want to have enough iPads, we don't want to have staff come in, because no one's going to want a job here because we don't have counselors and we don't have any facilities to educate our kids. I mean, what do you want the numbers for? Is the numbers just to see what they are for the fun of it, or is it to eliminate counselors?
I think,
It's to see where we need to go in the future.
I
So we have balanced our budget for the last 3 years off extra money from the government. We should have been $6 million less in our general fund by now. I mean, in our fund balance by now, but we got free money from the government for the last 3 years to the tune of about $6 million. Maybe I'm even low. Maybe it was more than that. Or we would have that much less in our fund balance.
I don't agree with that.
I 100% agree with it.
Well, you don't think that we took in less revenue because of taxes, because we had people unemployed because
No,
of
we didn't.
COVID?
We've been over revenue every year. We've never taken less revenue. Actually, during the pandemic, we took in more revenue.
Okay.
So-
I mean,
there's a lot of conversations, and I think there's a lot of questions, and our job is to give you those answers to those questions. Whatever information you need and want and desire to help you make informed decisions is our responsibility, and we'll do so. We will have tough decisions and decisions to make as to the direction we want to go. Please take a look at last year's general operating budget. Multiply that number roughly by what the cost of living currently is right now. That percentage will increase and look very comparable to what the current deficit is running. When we look at discretionary spending, there is a little discretionary spending. I think these are all good questions. I think we did and have exercised the use of ESSERs in some elements to offset general operating costs. That is true. Not totally in every aspect, but in some aspects, yes. I will take, at any point, when you email me questions that you want and data and information you need, we will work, all of us collectively as a team, to get that information and present it to the best of our ability.
Is it a reasonable request, and if it's not, totally tell me this, to find out how much of the ESSER's money is being used on general operating expenses? And the only reason I ask that is because I was not aware, maybe I was aware and you told me it, but was thinking that we had always designed or thought that ESSER's money was going to be used for one-time expenditures so that we wouldn't be in this position of now having to figure out where we're getting it out of our budget. So I'm kind of hoping that there's not a lot of that money being used for offsetting general.
I think that you're correct in that statement, but that's why we haven't been in a $2 million deficit for the last 3 years. Because we've been using it to offset stuff that was already there. But we did add a bunch of stuff that now never goes away.
Well, and some of it was supposed to be one-time purchases. And so this is why I had the discussion about the iPads, because when we first went into the lease, it was because we had ESSER's money to offset that. And now we are not going to have that for the next one. And that's why I brought up about the idea of pulling back to where we were pre-COVID in a regular budgetary aspect. That's just one aspect of it, the use of ESSER's money. I mean, I know we talked about using it for like upgrading a mechanical system or something like that, which was a one-time thing. It wasn't going to be an ongoing thing of our budget, and we could use ESSER's money for that. I'm kind of hoping that we didn't use a large percentage of it to offset general
I would be
operating.
more than happy. We can share again our plan of operation of what we agreed upon, presented on. I can go back to those historical presentations and reshare those. We did a balanced approach to both. There are some one-time operating costs, such as the controls and the roof repair. There are some that offset the cost of psychology services and school counselors. We balanced approach to both, but we did not add additional positions based upon ESSERs. No position was added except for contracted services. Contracted services go away when the contract ends.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about positions, and not what Phil was asking. I'm just talking about other regular budgetary things, you know, did we use that are going to be recurrent?
Yes.
And
Yes, we can share that information, absolutely.
I don't think, Dr. Fox, you'll find that it's much. I think you were pretty diligent about not doing that. I think we'll.
And that's why I thought we had collectively thought as a board that would be the approach. But when I was listening to Pete saying that there's going to be things now that once assessor monies go away, we're going to have to find now in our budget, or it's going to add to our budget deficit for the next year after ESSER's goes away. If that's not the case, then it's a moot point.
Well, it's not a moot point because these ESSER funds. Sorry. It's not a moot point because these ESSER's funds that are in here that are paying for staff now, we're going to have to now pay for that staff in the future when it goes away.
What Dr.
Now,
Fox
we
is saying
never,
they're
now
not
listen, we would have had that same expense 3 years ago, but we've been paying for it with different money for now. So that's the only reason we didn't have a deficit over the last 3 years.
Yeah, but he's saying that it wasn't used for staff. The ESSER's money wasn't
It
used
says
for
right
any
here
staff.
it was. It says right here in the budget it was used for staff.
But I believe Pete tried to say
Yeah,
that that
Pete's
was a
trying to say
coding
that-
thing he needed to work out.
He's had that highlighted.
ESSER's funds was used to offset the cost of some staff. I will get what that percentage is, and I will get what that numerical number is. Not 100% applied directly to that, but some have been, because there's some categories that allow us to. think at this time, we're going to allow for public comment.
Hi, thank you for all you do and for all the hard work for our school and for our students.
Excuse
I
me.
do like-
Before you start, can you let us know your name and where you live, township?
Yep. My name is Lorraine Vogel. I'm in Wheatfield Township. My husband and I have 5 children in the school district that go to Susquenita. We used to be cyber schooled, but now we're full-time. Thought you'd like to know that.
Thank you.
Okay, so the main reason I came today is for support for our transportation and our school bus drivers. There was an incident, I'm nervous, that's why I'm laughing. So there was an incident with a bus driver, and on our run, most of the families really like her. And this had to do with a child, and he is just a child. He has a discipline problem, and his parents falsely accused this bus driver, but because they called children and youth and the state police and all that, she is not, I mean, she's been cleared, but they have to wait for the paperwork to come through the state. But that's putting a hurting on our transportation. And I feel like, I don't understand why, like, these parents have so much control. I mean, this is our transportation for our students. We are taxpayers who are paying a lot of money to this for transportation, and I know we're down at least one bus. The transportation to and from Tech is down to 2 buses, and those buses are full. They're like over full. And then the same parents accused the next bus driver of basically the same thing, and there are video cameras on these buses. And you can see what happened. I didn't see, but you know, we're all talking. All of us parents are talking. And I just think it's wrong. This child actually spit in my son's face. And I mean, I know in terms of if you spit on a police officer, that's assault. So I would think that it was assault. And yet this child is allowed on this bus, and the bus driver is not allowed to do her job. And you have the transportation hurting. So I don't know, I have no clue, you know, what needs to be done. But I just sort of feel like maybe our bus drivers need a little bit more backing and a little more protection from things like this. The bus driver had to go through a lot. She had to go through, you know, like interviews with the state police and, you know, with children and youth and all this. And she's not, you know, she's not bringing in an income in. And our kids are hurting, you know, so I have no clue, you know. I just thought I'd have to come out. And that was really very, very interesting. I did enjoy the meeting, but I really wanted to hear what I had to say about that. Please, I don't know if there's anything you can do, but if there is, if you could back our bus drivers a little bit more, because who wants to drive a bus if you have to deal with that? I know I had thought about it, but there is no way I'd drive a bus right now. But anyway, thank you, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your courage in speaking, and I'm sure that bus driver appreciates your support.
And thank you for saying that, because this is the last thing I wanted to do, is talk up, because I feel like if you stand up and talk, you are going to get tomatoes. So thank you for saying that.
And I'm going to be a very unpopular person, but given that we also received an email similar to that today, and given that it is a personnel matter, I'm sorry, would it be appropriate for us to just quickly go into an executive session to discuss that?
It's not a personnel matter.
Or a contractual matter? It's not something we can discuss in public.
If there's a request to go into executive session, we can handle that executive session, and I will determine at that time if it's appropriate to discuss or not.
I
And
second
then-
Mike's opinion.
And then we would adjourn with understanding there will be no further action taken in public afterward. I'm only one board member suggesting that.
There's pizza. But I will second Mike's request.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.